Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here for the second episode of One Last Thing for the preseason game 2. And this is a new show still, so we're going to talk about it a little bit in terms of what the theme of this is. We're kind of recalling one additional thing, maybe hasn't been covered so much this week, maybe wasn't covered in the articles or other podcasts that I did. And here to do that with me each week is my co-host, Slava Cooperstein. Slava, how you doing?
Doing well, Ken. Yourself?
No complaints. Just the usual. Trying to manage my sleep this time of year and trying to get enough after the preseason games and when we have preseason games on a really tight schedule like this.
You'll be in mid-season form in 2 weeks.
Yeah, there you go. I appreciate that. So we knocked around an interesting topic here. At least it's interesting to us. We'll see if it's interesting to you. But that is, Monken's offense certainly has been good. We've been talking a lot during the offseason about the possibility that Monken's offense will also have some unintended consequences for the defense. And the idea would be that if you run a faster-paced offense, you're going to not only have more explosive plays, which I think most Ravens fans are thinking is a good idea, but you'll also probably have some shorter drives. You'll probably score more often. And you will undoubtedly allow your opponent more plays to play offense themselves, something that the Ravens offense has controlled extremely well during the Roman era. They have reduced plays and they've reduced a lot of variance in their offense by doing that. But let's talk about that a little bit, Slava.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously what we've seen so far in the preseason is a ton of pass plays, a lot of speed, a lot of explosion. And obviously, the question is how much can you extrapolate from what we've seen in the preseason, as and sort of project that into the regular season. Obviously, what we've seen in the preseason would probably be a very boom or bust kind of offense. But you don't have your starters in JK and Gus playing that much or at all in JK's instance. So hopefully, it's a little bit more measured and more based on, what the defense is giving the Ravens offense at any given moment.
Yeah, so it's definitely true. We haven't seen Lamar yet, so that alone is a big one. We haven't seen the starting offensive line. So that's one of the very fair questions. Is it really the Monken offense that we've seen so far? And there are some nice seeming things so far, but I have to believe that if you want to run an offense that's more about space and less about the point of attack, Roman's offense was just very good at grinding out first downs. It was extremely good at that. And in particular, in 2019, they were the best team in the whole National Football League at doing it. Every time the Ravens got a new set of downs, they had an 80% chance to get a first down or a touchdown from that point. And that's just very hard to beat. They were effective on fourth down. There wasn't anybody else in the NFL that was particularly close. The Chiefs were the next closest, and they weren't too far behind. And then I think the third team might have been at like 71%. So that's such an enormous difference that you really, it's hard to overstate how important a difference like that is in terms of being able to grind out first downs. Now, the complaint was, we need a passing game because everybody has a passing game. We're not going to ever win in the playoffs. Forget these meaningless regular season games. The complaints were that you couldn't use that. And in fact, they ran 90 plays in that postseason loss to Tennessee, but they did not. They turned the ball over, obviously, a handful of times and turned it over on fourth down a handful more times. I think it was 4 in that games. And that led to a loss. But I've got to believe that the Roman offense as constructed was a lot more consistent about grinding out first downs and led naturally to many fewer defensive snaps.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you would hopefully get out of a Monken offense is sort of more along the lines of what he's been preaching versus what we've seen in the preseason, right? So Monken, talks about using the talent that's available to him, and that's going to dictate how he's going to construct his offense. So, we certainly have the most speed and probably the deepest receiving core that the Ravens have ever had. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that. But at the same time, we have four really good running backs, and we have the best blocking fullback in the league, and we have 3 to 4 tight ends, all of whom are seem to be pretty good at blocking and receiving. So there's a lot that this offense can do, and the ability to adjust and adapt to game time situations, whether we're talking about what the defense is showing or what the actual score and time left on the clock. That's what Monken preaches, and if he does that, then we're kind of on the efficient frontier of offensive efficiency and scoring.
Yes, I agree. I think it's all about efficiency, really, when you get down to it, because I think the critical metric for the Ravens this year is going to be points per drive. And the bar has been set extremely high by the early Roman years. They in 2000, they had 3.08 points per drive. It's the 5th highest total in NFL history. And it was an incredibly cheap offense, run very well. And they chose to go away from that in 2020. They hadn't yet. Obviously, they're still with Roman, and they still had about 2.65 or something like that points per drive. That, to me, is the place roughly they need to get back to if they're going to be serious Super Bowl contenders. They need to be in the upper 2s in order to contend. And just watching this second preseason game, I'll say, they got outsnapped 81-49. Okay, so that's horrible. And they had some players on the field who aren't going to be there during the regular season, so that's good. It's not going to be Anthony Brown and Owen Wright deciding your fate in the final quarter. And those two guys, are a big part of the offense, and they ran 8 plays in the final 14 minutes while the Redskins ran some ungodly number. And I don't have that directly in front of me, but it's a lot of plays, maybe 30. So they've got to find a way, obviously, to be more efficient, staying on the field and grinding out some first downs with the lead, in particular, if they're going to allow their defense to maintain its restedness in the fourth quarter when they'll need it to close out games.
Yeah, and I mean, also a part of that, and I know you know this, but part of that the context that needs to be kind of viewed in from the preseason game is, the Commanders have a stable of really high quality receivers. They're going against the third, fourth, fifth string corners. They're picking up those first downs, and that's certainly a part of what allowed them to play as much as they did. But what you hope to see in the regular season is, if the Monken offense is efficient and scores with some regularity, at that point you're kind of dictating to your offense, as the Ravens is dictating to the opposing offense a little bit, in the sense that, okay, we're down 2 scores, we're down however much, like all of a sudden our options for what we're going to be able to do as the clock continues to grind are going to be less.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. That's absolutely right on the money. But if you're down a bunch of snaps and you're going to that fourth quarter, and let's say even with a 2-touchdown lead, the balance of strategies still favor the trailing team in pretty much any sport. It's very difficult. It's always requires effort to close out the clock. It requires real gambling to do what the Ravens tried to do on that final drive and stop a team from getting into field goal range. Defending field goal range against 4 downs, one of the hardest freaking things to do in the NFL. And it was interesting. This game, McDonald pulled out the entire bag of tricks. Well, pulled out 2 or 3 of the things from his bag of tricks. He didn't change packages at all. They didn't go to any dime defense or anything like that. But within the committed nickel framework, They rushed 8 men, I think it was 4 times, and 7 men another time. And they had never done that. The entirety of last year, they didn't rush 7 plus the entire year. So they realized where they were in the game in terms of just being dog tired on the field, not having anyone who could really stay with the Redskins threes at that point in terms of the receivers. And, they had to do this. So, yes, they dictated to the opposing offense, you have to pass, but they had already dictated to themselves by how tired they'd allowed them to get that they were going to have to rush the passer in these extreme ways to try and get off the field.
Yeah, and it's obviously telling that they didn't get home. But I'm hopeful that what we saw in the preseason is sort of trying different things out, getting to highlight different players to see where they might fit on the roster, if they're going to make it or not, and maybe even a little bit of just let's get some things on tape for the rest of the league to see. Like, for instance, I think Monken was very intentional about showcasing the many, many speed options that the Ravens have. You saw Zay Flowers make splash plays. You saw Keaton Mitchell make a ton of splash plays.
Mm-hmm.
The Ravens have a lot of speed. So when those players make it onto the field, the defenses are forced to account for them. So I think there is some intentionality about some of these things that aren't necessarily going to look the same way as they do in the regular season. And certainly the result from the Commanders preseason game would lead you to hope that things are looking a little different.
Right. And look, I'm not delusional. I understand the concept that, you're playing different grades of player. And also as you go through that, your opponent may not be doing the same thing. And the Ravens rested 35 men in this game, and the Commanders rested 10. If you don't think, the Ravens have always been accused of overplaying preseason games for the win, and that's why they have this 24-game win streak, damn it. Now, the Commanders, they were very intentional in their desire to win this game. They've got this change in ownership. They've got the desire to stop losing preseason games to their, Beltway rival. And they really don't want this. They didn't want that to continue. And then you saw the way they reacted, both the fans and the players, in terms of the end of that game. And it looked like the Commanders had just won the Super Bowl, the team nobody wanted. Oh my God, look what they've done to the Baltimore Ravens. It was ridiculous. I mean, so it would have been great to continue the streak. And the Ravens certainly played hard. I thought it was really nice that there's a lot of national interest being generated by this, including, Joe Buck talking about the text he got from Papa about how interested he was in this preseason game at the end, and Aikman saying it's the greatest preseason game he's ever been, a part of. Terrific.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a lot of fun. Even just on just watching quality of football level, mm-hmm. right? Like, not even just, obviously when you are thinking about like who's making the team and stuff, and you're sort of trying to evaluate people, any preseason game can be of interest. But this was I think a higher quality of football than we had that you'll traditionally see in a preseason game.
I would agree. I would agree. And obviously there are other concerns with this. I think some of the Ravens' depth at corner being kind of exposed in this game is obviously a bad thing. We're going through a checklist, except it's not a checklist in terms of the cornerback. It's more like there are a lot of X's in these check boxes. And unfortunately, I think Mayfield got added previously. Swan was already released based on his play in week 1. And I think you look at Caillou Kelly and you wonder, how the heck is this guy going to help us this year? He made a great play, by the way, in the 2-point conversion. I don't want to minimize that in any way, but I think he was just lost in coverage too much. There were a lot of extended pockets. So they had some problems, getting home with the pass rush, but nonetheless, what he did did not give me a lot of positive warm fuzzies for the regular season.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way you can look at Caillou Kelly and think that guy's going to be ready to come into a game and contribute positively. Like he's he is instantly going to be the guy that the opposing offense is going to target.
Right.
Luckily, Rocky Sin is back practicing, and so that helps everything, right? Like, all of a sudden,
Darby.
Right, Darby is practicing. It'll be interesting to see if he makes it into the next preseason game. But I just have no concept. I mean, he looked good from like the little clips I think that people were playing, but in terms of movement. But it'll be interesting to see whether he can make it into the next preseason game and get some live fire.
I kind of would not. If we're talking Rock Ya-Sin, I wouldn't expect that. I think Darby, who's been at practice since last week, is likely to get a few snaps or may possibly get a few snaps. But if you look at it, they already put a couple of guys who they intend to make the roster at some point. Got to be careful about that. Kayvon Seymour and Mitchell. Sorry, not Mitchell. Stevens.
Stevens, yeah.
Yeah, they took them out after 2 series. So they already got the starters treatment from that perspective. Another one, the guy that left early who won them the first game is Worley. He could have been out there at the end of the game too. They said no. They're really trying to work on a player. So and by the way, one guy we need to give some real credit to. Tay Hayes had a wonderful game. They didn't throw at him. The 2 times they did, interception and pass for -1, where Hayes made the tackle. So they did potentially get one check mark in their checklist of potential cornerbacks that might help the team. And I think he's in a pretty good position to make the roster, but he certainly will get a long trial in this next game. I think he'll be in the game probably just about from the beginning. If there is a little bit of a trial for maybe Ya-Sin and Darby working opposite each other, or just Darby getting a few snaps, I think Hayes is one of the guys they'd want in early in the game this week.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Ya-Sin, Darby, Seymour, and Stevens. Like, that's like the line right now. Like, below that line, you're going to get a ton of snaps, and above that line, you might just get a couple snaps just to continue to get those reps in, and maybe knock a little rust off in the case of Ya-Sin and Darby. But they really can't afford to lose any of those guys right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'll set you up with one more question here. What's the probability the Ravens go out and get a cornerback before opening day?
It's interesting. The Ravens have, there are a couple positions where they have an embarrassment of riches. There are a couple positions where they have just more depth than they can do anything with. Like, I wouldn't call, middle linebacker an embarrassment of riches, but I would call it they have more depth than they can get onto the team. So, a player for a player, like a marginal kind of, either Ross or Phillips or one of these other guys, kind of who've been playing quality football. It's just you can't get everybody onto the team for a, kind of bubble corner somewhere else. I'm maybe not quite 50-50, I'd say, but like 45% chance.
Okay, so I had it at 60. I think they're good, and I still think it's possible they'll trade Patrick Queen in pursuit of a corner. But to get it, you got to get a pretty good corner, and it'd be either a rookie with some particularly good prospects. Kelly Ringo of the Eagles is the guy who've really been pimping for that trade. I think it would make a ton of sense, probably for both sides to do that. But the Eagles might decide, no, we have too much in Ringo. That would be, I think, the more likely team to say no. That who says no kind of thing you always see on Twitter.
Yeah.
But I want to get back to the offense for a second, because I'll let you respond to that first, and then I want to get back and talk a little bit about Patrick Ricard.
So with regard to Queen, the only thing I would say is I think it's very reasonable for the Ravens to say we really like what we saw last year out of Queen and Roquan right next to one another. We think it's going to be better this year. I think Queen's going to have a really good year for us if he plays for us, and I think it's very reasonable to say we're not willing to risk ruining that chemistry or productivity in the middle of the defense for a corner prospect that we don't know as much about.
Yeah, you have Batman and Robin. You don't just trade Robin because it's easy. You really have to get value for that. But the Ravens have, you mentioned earlier, they have so much depth at that inside linebacker spot. And they have a lot of their special teams are built on that. But let's go through these guys for a minute. Malik Harrison has the value of being now larger at like 259 pounds, by the way, which is just huge. Plays outside linebacker, plays Sam, but can also move inside. I think the Ravens really want to keep him long term, would be my feeling about his fit with the team. So I think he stays. Then you've got Delshon Phillips, a valuable special teams player on one of the biggest heaters you'll ever see in terms of what he's doing in camp and even in the preseason as well with that great first game. Didn't play too much in this one. Started with Harrison out early, so we didn't see as much. But he's playing some great freaking football. It would be a real mess to cut him. And it's worse because he's still in his, I think, 4th year at present. I'll look that up here if I've got my sheets right in. Yeah, I do. So I think he's still in his 4th year, which means he's got to go through waivers. And I would think he gets picked up by somebody if you release him to that. Yeah, 4th year. So that's a problem. Then you've got Ross, and admittedly, he's 2nd-year player. I don't think there's too many people outside the Ravens organization who know just how good this guy is. And he didn't look that great in this last game against the Commanders. So maybe he's a guy you can sneak onto the practice squad, and it's not the biggest risk of all time. But and then you've got Simpson, of course, as your 3rd guy. You're keeping him. You can't figure out how to get him on the field. And I mean, honestly, I can't figure out any way you get Simpson on the field. Maybe McDonald will, because he's creative. But if you're a committed nickel team to start with, I don't see how you get him on. You can't really become more committed to inside linebacker than that.
Right.
And so you'd have to put him on at slot corner or do something else where I think you'd actually be playing against his strengths if you want to get him in on passing down. Edge has been suggested. Jadeveon Clowney probably reduces the chance of that. You've got other guys in terms of Owe and Ajabo you're going to want to have on the field, maybe even Tavius Robinson on obvious passing downs. They've got interior linemen who can rush the quarterback this year that they haven't had in the past in Travis Jones and Matabike. I just think they have a lot of players right now. It's hard for me to see how Simpson gets on the field with the current roster. So given that's the case, do you accelerate your timetable? And if you trade Queen, it does a couple things for you that are positive other than the value you get from Kelly Ringo. And the first is that you are more flexible in terms of what defense you can put out there by down. So you can effectively go back to platooning inside linebackers. Now, I'm not saying Queen doesn't provide real value on 3rd down. He does. He provides real value on other downs, particularly when he's working with Roquan. And we saw how well that went last year. I would hate to lose it. But on the other hand, I would hate to go into this season with their deficiency at cornerback being what it is. And a young cornerback who's, not a vet in year 6 or whatever, a rookie, would just be an exciting pickup in terms of what they could get.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's all about somebody's going to have to give them a really solid offer. I don't think they're going to sell low on Patrick Queen. I think Patrick Queen gives them too much for them to accept anything other than a pretty good corner.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah,
I mean, you still might be getting your 3rd corner, but we know how in Baltimore, in particular, the 3rd corner gets in there for a lot of games, or until he gets hurt. Right. He'll be in there himself. So it's not until they really stop playing defense the way they do, and corners get hurt anyway. They get a lot of soft tissue injury. They get other injuries that just happen even down the field. But one thing, if you look back at the 2000 Ravens, they're really tackling with 9 guys. They told Starks and McAllister, basically stay out of the pile.
Right.
We don't want you to make tackles. And that led to, a really good season of health for both those players, and obviously very dominant seasons. So let's go back for a moment if we can. Sure. Talk a little bit about Patrick Ricard, because I keep juggling through how this roster is going to fall out. And I think we're going to find some things will happen between now and the opener. Injuries will develop, be exposed. They're not being talked about now, but everybody has a few aches and pains by this point in camp. And a few of those are going to develop into injuries that are serious enough to keep a player on the shelf for 4 weeks. That will probably solve a lot of the questions of, do you keep some of these players on the roster? So I think they're going to have about a 4-player stable, I would predict, of players who start the year on IR and then aren't available until week 4. I would project very strongly that includes at least one offensive lineman, even though the offensive line group has been quite healthy. I think they'd like to keep 10 and roster 9 would be the way I would probably project it. They might even keep 11 and roster 10, but keep 10 and roster 9. But Patrick Ricard is a guy who I don't know if his roster spot is entirely secure, and it's basically he needs to not only play well as he did last night, you know what I mean, Monday night. He played very well, but he needs to have an advocate in Monken to say, I really need him in the offense.
Yeah, it's, you at first blush, you think, if Monken or if the Ravens cut Ricard, then that's going to really signal, a change in a complete, going away from grinding out the game. But I don't know how fair it is to say that when you have as many good blocking tight ends as the Ravens have. I do think it's almost a foregone conclusion that Ricard's gone next year. Mm-hmm. But it is a difficult choice, and you're looking for that roster efficiency any way that you can. And the fact of the matter is, all of these tight ends, they can, they're a much more of a receiving threat than Ricard is, right? Significantly more. And the question is, how much less are they going to give you in terms of blocking? That they wouldn't be willing to part with Ricard.
Right. I mean, obviously, some of this is by raw number of blocking snaps he had, because there's not a lot of players that have the number of blocking snaps that Ricard has. But if you look at a service like PFF, it's going to show you that Ricard is in a stratosphere of his own as a blocker in this league. And again, part of that is a matter of, because he gets so many at-bats, his information is very credible, and others, they get many fewer opportunities, and they get regressed to the mean formulaically by either having a big variance assigned to them, which means they're only, say, 1 standard deviation better rather than 2.5 standard deviations better if you're Ricard. So they end up being, not as special in terms of a PFF rating on the topic. Even without that, I think it's pretty clear Ricard is in a league by himself as a blocker. I mean, just stylistically, when you subjectively, when you look at it, he's like nobody else in terms of his ability to deliver physicality for an offense. I think the Ravens really need him to close out games, and I hope the decision is, I don't think it will be, is one for Monken alone to make. But if you look at this roster, the need for roster spots is primarily on the offense. So I hate giving this away, and Maureen will probably come in here and beat me up over this, because she really loves to play that name the roster game. Almost never does the roster go anything but 25, 25, and 3 in terms of how you divide your players, offense, defense, and your wolf pack. But this year, I would bet it goes another way, because there's going to be all of the handshake guys are on defense. There are not any offensive handshake guys, so that will be the determining factor. Wouldn't shock me if it's 27-3, 27-23. It would not shock me even, I guess, if it's 28-22, because you're going to have 3 of those adjusted back to, bring it to 25-25 for opening day. Obviously the Ravens do have some ways to get through this roster crunch. I just hope that not only does Monken want Ricard because he wants Ricard, because Harbaugh wants Ricard, but he wants Ricard because he really wants to figure out a way to use him to close out games and to make it easier on the defense not to play tons of snaps.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes me feel reasonably confident that Ricard stays is, like, who are you sacrificing him for, right? Like, it's like a lot of people talk about Volkolek, right? Like, Volkolek has been a really pleasant surprise for sure, but you have Andrews, Likely, and
Cool.
Kolar, all of whom are going to be on the team through or they have the Ravens can have them on the team through 2025, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like Vokalek is looking to knock any of those guys off anytime soon. So sure, Vokalek brings more as a receiver, ostensibly than Ricard, but what's he bringing more than those other guys that he would have to kick off? So to me, I think Ricard's pretty safe.
Yeah, it is not just those guys. I mean, it's Keaton Mitchell who will take
That's
his
a good
spot.
point.
It's a fourth running back that the Ravens have to keep. They cannot cut Keaton Mitchell. If they cut Keaton Mitchell, they lose him.
I completely agree with you. I think we need to keep him. I think he's going to be very important to the Ravens in a couple of years.
Next year, because it's Hill and him are the only guys who are signed for next year, and maybe it's a mid-round running back that they get for the third guy, or maybe it's even somebody further down in the undrafted ranks that they go with. And I think there's a reasonable possibility that they re-sign one. We were estimated this yesterday with Voss on the offensive show, but I had for 0, 1, or 2 of those guys. I can't remember who was who, but they're so close that I'm just going to report them both here. I think it was me. I had 50%. Neither of them are re-signed. 45%. One of them is re-signed. Probably the higher probability being Edwards, and 5% that both are re-signed. And I honestly don't know why I even put 5% there, because I don't know I can't even envision how it would happen.
I would say the only way that would happen is that the running back market is so deflated that that they may just feel that Baltimore is a good bet for them. But no, I think those are very reasonable percentages, and I think you made a great point. I think Keaton Mitchell was more of a threat to Ricard's spot than a fourth tight end.
Yeah, and then he's not the only one. It's the 10th offensive lineman that threatens Ricard. And one thing you could say is, if Ricard's only going to play inline tight end, and I'm trying to mimic what the discussion might be in the cutdown room, then we might as well just have an extra 6 offensive linemen, because they're the one group that you can really expect to block as well as Ricard, to play inline tight end for us. We don't need to have Patrick Ricard specifically to do that job. It's something that Daniel Faalele could do and impose his will physically on other players. Well,
Ricard's done it, and he's done it at an elite level. So I'm very hopeful, like you, that Monken finds a way to, and Harbaugh find a way to incorporate him and keep him.
Right. I guess I will say that if the Ravens decided for whatever reason they don't want that they're cutting Ricard, I have to look at with a jaundiced eye at Monken as being the reason for it, because I don't really see how otherwise. It's just not enough money. You save $1.75 million roughly in terms of cap. You got to spend 40% of that probably to replace him on the roster with either veteran or a rookie. God forbid it would be Mason, that is the replacement for him. Yeah. And
that would infuriate me.
It would be absolutely infuriating. But if it's Vokalek, even he's cheap, he's right. But still is, roughly 40%. So you end up saving $1 million of cap. Now you can save that on your back. You can save 50% more than that on your backup quarterback choice if you take Johnson over Huntley. So if they start making cheap deals all over the place, then I'm at least I understand where it's going, and they really do look at it as 1 year out of Ricard, et cetera, et cetera. But I wouldn't even say it's a sure thing for just 1 year out of Ricard. I think there's a chance that he'll stay next year, and the likely would be his salary gets negotiated down to do so.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and I just have to speak this into the world, because I just keep thinking about this. I just wish that we could get Tyrod Taylor back as a backup. Mm-hmm. I just think he'd be so perfect for us. Like, I would just feel so much better about it if we had him. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole. When I see him play, I'm just like, gosh, he would be perfect.
He was definitely a heck of a player there for the Bills for a while. And it hasn't worked out as well, obviously, for here in Huntley under some very difficult circumstances the last couple of years. And one of the issues just at the heart of this is, and it may be true for Tyrod too, is just that he didn't have the same natural fit in the Jackson offense, in the Jackson Roman offense, because he's not Lamar Jackson. And so, your read options just aren't as good coming out of that. No, anyway, is what it is.
It is what it is.
All right. So anyway, just something we thought we'd share with you in terms of probably something to watch out for this season in terms of the Ravens offense and how they're impacting the defense in terms of snaps. It's certainly something I'm sure you'll see me referring to in the columns and on the shows here a fair amount. Slava, always a pleasure to do this show with you. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
At Slava Cooperstein on Twitter. Love to talk to Ravens, so reach out to me. I guess on X, reach out to me, and I'll get back to you.
All right, we can just call it Twitter ourselves for pretty much as long as we feel, unless they threaten to ban our
That's right. That's
whatever.
right. Yeah, exactly.
But and that's Slava Cooperstein with a K. So,
that's right. Yep. Kuper. Yep.
Okay. Outstanding. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study short, hit me up with a DM on Twitter. I see people talking about wanting to do a short. What I say is turn that thought into action with the DM to me. And the usual process is I'll call you up. We'll talk about it a little bit. We'll see if there's a kernel for a show there that would make sense. And this is how I meet new people to have on the show as more regular people. This is how I met Slava. This is how I've met a lot of other people that are worth bringing back on the show for many more times. And love to meet you. Love to talk football with you and hear what you have to say and create a nice piece of content with you. Slava, thanks again.
See you next weekend.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.